Savopoulos, 46, was the successful CEO and president of American Iron Works, a major construction and welding company based in Maryland. He came from a Greek immigrant family and built a reputation as a prominent businessman in the Washington, D.C. area. His wife, Amy Savopoulos, 47, was a devoted mother, active in D.C.'s social circles, and a passionate volunteer for local art foundations. Their son Philip was a bright fourth grader who attended the prestigious St. Albans private school. His interests included Harry Potter books, baseball, and racing. Housekeeper Vera Figueroa, 57, had worked loyally for the Savopoulos family for over 20 years. She lived modestly in suburban Maryland and was like a second mother to the children. By all accounts, the Savopoulos household was a happy hub of activity for 3 generations. That peace was shattered the evening of Wednesday, May 13th, 2015, when an intruder took the family hostage and unleashed 19 hours of unimaginable terror and violence. Around 3:30 p.m. on May 13th, Darren Went, a former welder for Savopoulos' company, American Iron Works, entered the Savopoulos residence at 3201 Woodland Drive in D.C.'s exclusive Woodley Park neighborhood. Amy was out walking at the time, and her son Philip, 10, was homesick from school with housekeeper Vera Figueroa. Savas had not yet returned home from American Iron Works. Eventually, Amy came home from her walk, entering the nightmare unfolding inside. Went took Philip and Vera hostage and lay in wait, trapping them upstairs. Around 5:30 p.m., Savas arrived back home after receiving a call from Amy claiming she needed him to watch Philip. As soon as Savas walked in, Went confronted him and took him captive as well. Went held the 4 hostages overnight, binding their hands and feet with duct tape. His motive appeared to be extortion, and he used Philip as leverage to get what he wanted out of the adults. The next day, on May 14th, under duress, Savas arranged for his assistant to drop off $40,000 in cash, stuffed in a backpack, and left in the garage. The assistant followed orders without realizing the family was being held inside. Around 9:30 a.m., Figueroa's husband became concerned when she did not return from her shift at the Savopoulos house. He came to check on her, but no one answered the door. Savas was forced to make excuses by phone about her absence. Sometime before 1 p.m., with the $40,000 ransom in hand, Went proceeded to murder the 4 people he had kept alive and cooperative for almost 19 hours. He brutally beat them with baseball bats and stabbed them with knives taken from the kitchen. Went then poured gasoline around the 2 upstairs bedrooms where the victims were bound and set them ablaze. The 3 adults already had fatal injuries from the beatings and stabbings when the fires were set. 10-year-old Philip still had duct tape on his arms and was likely alive when the fire started. It seemed as if he desperately tried to escape the flames, but succumbed to thermal and sharp force injuries. These final tortured moments remain among the most chilling details of Went's sadistic crimes. Around 1:24 p.m. on May 14th, D.C. firefighters arrived at the burning home. Inside, they discovered the charred bodies of the 4 victims. Savas and Amy were found tied up in a second-floor bedroom near Vera's body. Young Philip was in his bedroom where the fire was concentrated. Vera was alive when rescued, but died shortly after from her extensive injuries. Savas and Amy were likely dead before the fire from repeated brutal blows from baseball bats and the stab wounds inflicted during their captivity. The gruesome scene horrified even veteran firefighters and police. The community was shocked that such brutal crimes could happen in an exclusive neighborhood home to politicians, dignitaries, and wealthy elite. Once the bodies were removed, evidence technicians scoured the scene for clues. They took DNA samples, photographed the fire-damaged rooms, and cataloged potential weapons including knives, bats, and the gasoline canisters. The medical examiner conducted autopsies and determined the victims died from extensive blunt force trauma from beatings and stabbings, as well as smoke inhalation and burns. It was clear they endured horrific suffering before death. In the hours after the murders, local and federal investigators began piecing together the sequence of events through background checks, phone records, and interviews with Savopoulos' employees and anyone who had seen the family in the final days. Their urgent priority was finding who was responsible. It was immediately clear the deaths were murders by an intruder, not accidental. There were signs of forced entry with a broken lock and a shoe print on the side of the house, indicating the killer broke inside. The intruder had disabled multiple security systems that would have alerted Savas to trouble. Valuable clues at the scene included the remnants of a Domino's pizza delivered to the house while the family was held hostage, as well as samurai swords and baseball bats taken from the home used to torture and bludgeon the victims. Duct tape, a knife, and gasoline canisters were also found. With few immediate suspects, an urgent manhunt began to find who was responsible for the shocking murders of the well-known family and their housekeeper. The Savopoulos offered a reward for any information about the killings. In the days after, investigators got a major break. DNA on a pizza crust ordered to the house during the captivity matched 34-year-old Darren Went, a former Savopoulos employee. Police also traced the $40,000 dropped off back to Went, being the likely caller coercing Savas. With his American Ironworks connection, Went quickly became the sole suspect in the quadruple murder. Once identified through DNA, police uncovered Went's extensive criminal history and background. A certified welder, originally from Guyana, Went did past work for American Ironworks, but had a history of arrests for assault, burglary, and weapons charges. Interviews with Went's family painted a picture of a troubled man who had been involved in multiple disputes and altercations. He had been fired from American Ironworks after Savopoulos complained about the deficient welding work. This potentially gave him a grudge against his former boss. Went's relatives said they had not seen him for several weeks leading up to the murders. Neighbors reported suspicious late-night activity and unexplained absences. It appeared Went had been planning something, though no one imagined he was capable of the cruelty inflicted on the Savopoulos family. Once identified through DNA evidence, police urgently worked to locate Went before he could flee the region. A week after the murders, on May 21st, U.S. Marshals tracked him down to the New York City area and kept him under surveillance. He was followed back to Maryland outside of D.C. That evening, police made a traffic stop and apprehended him with two female accomplices, including his girlfriend. Police also stopped a vehicle following Went that contained his brother and other associates. Inside the two cars, they found $13,000 in money orders and $10,000 in cash, all in $100 bills, matching the ransom money. Went was arrested and charged with first-degree quadruple homicide and arson. The others with him were eventually released. The community reacted with relief that a suspect was in custody, but also surprised that Went was the perpetrator. His former defense lawyer described him as mild-mannered. Went's family insisted he was innocent, claiming he never ate pizza despite DNA on the crust. But prosecutors asserted that Went's DNA and cell phone records placed him at the scene of the hostage-taking and murders. They began building a detailed case against him as the sole person who had committed all the heinous crimes. Went was appointed a public defender and entered a not guilty plea. His trial was set for September 2018, over 3 years after the slayings, to allow time for the massive amount of evidence to be processed. Hundreds of interviews had to be conducted and thousands of documents analyzed. The prosecution amassed cell phone records, surveillance camera footage tracking Went's movements, DNA results, and forensic recreations of the crime scene. Both sides had to research case law regarding evidence admissibility and anticipate motions by the other side. The defense team's main strategy was creating reasonable doubt by suggesting another perpetrator who committed the murders. Given the high-profile nature and the brutal details, the trial was sure to gain national media spotlight. The surviving family members would testify about their loss, so emotions were sure to run high in the courtroom. Jury selection for Darren Wendt's trial began on September 4th, 2018. The prosecution team was composed of veteran attorneys with decades of combined experience handling high-stake cases. Wendt was represented by public defenders experienced in difficult death penalty trials who would work aggressively to undermine the evidence implicating their client. Security was extremely tight for the high-profile proceedings. In opening statements on September 11, 2018, lead prosecutor Laura Bach described the crimes as heinous, atrocious, and cruel. She outlined how DNA, cell records, and surveillance footage would prove Wendt's guilt across 20 charges related to the slaughter of the Savopoulos family and their housekeeper. The defense asserted that the evidence was circumstantial and did not conclusively show Wendt was the killer. They indicated a possible alternate suspect would be revealed. However, the early DNA evidence presented seemed to strongly refute any claim Wendt was not present. Over 6 weeks, the jury heard from over 100 prosecution witnesses who helped establish a timeline of the events from May 13th leading up to the murders and arson on the afternoon of May 14th. Crime scene evidence directly linked Wendt. The most powerful testimony came from surviving family members. Daughters Abigail and Katerina Savopoulos were away at boarding school when they got the horrific news. In the aftermath, they spoke of their close relationships with their parents, brother, and housekeeper Vera. They described their shock and anguish upon hearing the horrible news. On October 25th, 2018, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury unanimously convicted Wendt on all 20 counts, including murder, kidnapping, and extortion. Savas Savopoulos' father tearfully hugged the prosecutors, praising their work to gain justice. On February 1st, 2019, the court proceeded to the sentencing phase. The prosecution presented emotional victim impact statements from Abigail and Katerina Savopoulos, who spoke of how the sudden loss of their entire family shattered their worlds forever. Friends of the family testified about the Savopoulos' generosity, philanthropy, and zest for life. Housekeeper Vera Figueroa's daughter also gave an impact statement about losing her mother. Given the number of capital convictions, the prosecution recommended 4 consecutive life sentences for Darren Wendt, without the possibility of parole. His attorneys pleaded for leniency and said he would appeal. In her ruling, Judge Juliet McKenna cited the extreme cruelty and depravity of the crimes. She sentenced Wendt to the maximum penalty, 4 life terms, without parole for the murders. He began serving his sentence in a maximum security federal prison. News of Wendt's sentencing brought some closure, but could not erase the horror of what happened in the Savopoulos home. The mansion was demolished in 2017, but the pain remained for the 2 daughters, forever impacted. While Wendt never confessed, intriguing questions persist. Did he really act alone? The complexity of the crime suggests possible accomplices, but no one else was ever charged or implicated by evidence. What twisted rage or desire for vengeance could drive someone to commit such cruelties? Wendt said nothing to explain his motives before sentencing. In the end, the full truth of what transpired during the 19-hour hostage ordeal leading up to the brutal murders remains unsettled. For Washington, D.C., the case is unforgettable. The violent deaths of 4 innocent people in a privileged neighborhood shocked the city. The Savopoulos murder saga left scars and a sober warning that darkness can visit any home without warning.